I'd been a musician and an inspiring musician starting from fourth grade, and then worked my way through music school and becoming a professional. So I never even fathomed anything else. So weirdly, I had a kind of a side gig that I used to do on weekends when I was in town, and these cops used to come watch us play. And so when I mentioned to them that I was thinking about a career change, they convinced me to cut 8 inches of locks off and join the police department, which I thought was completely whack at first, but it sounded exciting also. And being a creative, I also thought it would be an interesting match. I still have kind of a type A, but I'm a creative thinker and was traveling with bands that were multicultural bands and stuff. So I was, kind of a peace and love hippie jumping into the police world, which was certainly interesting, but was an advantage in many ways. I was my top driver in my class, top shooter, and stuff like that because I didn't have much experience in any of that. Um, so ultimately, I got in with the goal in mind of getting into undercover work right off the jump because I just thought I could mesh with different cultures and be a real asset, despite the fact that I'm a big white stiff. And typically, that's what they look for. They look for somebody that can assimilate into a particular culture where they're having a drug problem or whatever. If it's narcotics or whatever, then they'll say, "Okay, this is the Hispanic part of town. This is the Black part of town, and whatever." So they're trying to bring people into those units that kind of meet those, match those profiles. And so I started really working towards learning how to buy dope and learning about the processes and wrote some letters to try to get permission from the higher ups to learn how to do, serving the dynamic search warrants and got all of my teams SWAT certified there in the patrol division. And we were able to actually start serving warrants after work for overtime. And so it meshed into this thing where I would come to work and go buy dope all day. And then at night, I'd have a team that was getting off work and we'd all go crash houses that, where narcotics was too busy to get or whatever. So ultimately, I moved my way into narcotics after the fourth try, actually, because again, I didn't match necessarily anybody's profile, but was proving that I could do it anyway. And it worked on a really bad side of town, purposefully so, just because that's where a lot of the crime is in some of the poor neighborhoods. And in particular, you have neighborhoods that have people in them that are held hostage by gang violence and drug trafficking and prostitution, stuff like that. Whenever you have poor neighborhoods, they're not all bad people at all, but there's an influx of crime in those concentrated areas. So at this particular time, there was a side of town with an area within that side of town that was particularly dangerous and gang ridden. The Crips had taken it over, lots of shootings. Kids couldn't get in and out of there to go to school. They had lookouts. It was kind of a 6 by 6 block square area. Lookouts at one way in, one way out, with lookouts and radios at both sides. And city council and the chief of police even got together and said, how do we fix this? Because they just had recently had another murder there, and they're like, what do we do? So they were putting their heads together and funded, to spare no expense. Let's just start crashing this place. And they were writing warrants and doing jump outs in unmarked vans and pulling people over within any proximity of there that come in and out of there to no avail. I mean, they were going in and hitting warrants and hitting what they call a dry hole where there's nobody there, there's no dope there. They're questioning their own information. And so somebody like me, who almost has a blissful ignorance at the time, just said, "Hey, I got this magnificent idea," and pitched it to an informant, and then consequently pitched it to my boss and said, "Hey, look, the only way to really get into this is for me to get in undercover. I'll pose as a big time dope dealer, so I don't have to match a particular profile because I'm big time anyway. I'm just trying to start a new game. I have a source that was busted by the feds in the Austin area, so now I'm moving up out of into a different city. So I'll kind of appear more as an opportunity." And both of those fools laughed their ass off to start with, because Crips and this and just seems nonsensical. But nothing else was working, so they let me give it a shot, and that's kind of the impetus of how the whole idea became. I was a musician one day, and then just a short few years later, I was infiltrating a street gang of Black Crips.